Let me welcome you today to this first lesson of how to avoid life's pitfalls, coming out of Genesis chapter 37, 1 through 5, 19 through 24, 26, and 27. The pitfalls of betrayal. The point today, God is at work, even when it's not obvious. Let's face it today, we live in a fallen and broken world where people is looking out for their very best interests. Our world is filled with disappointments. Things don't turn out the way that we have imagined. And to make things even worse, we all have experienced hurt from someone that's close to us. That's because we've all been betrayed by someone. You cannot, someone that we trust and we've looked to. But today, you don't have to be defeated. Even though that betrayal may carry consequences to our family, even our jobs, and even into our own personal lives. We think of Jesus. He was betrayed by one of his disciples, yet he never betrays us. And through his words today, we're going to see how betrayal affects one man by looking into the life of Joseph. By taking one step at a time and keeping our eyes on Jesus in the middle of our circumstances, so that we can avoid and we can identify the steps that leads to betrayal and to avoid the consequences of sin. We'll see that the book of Genesis, it provides the account of God's people from the time of God's promise to Abraham until the death of Jacob and Joseph and the great-grandsons and great-grandsons respectively. We have seen that in those moments, God has showed us how that He's worked in the lives of Abraham and in His extended family to guide them in keeping with His plan for His people. He worked in the life of Jacob, and his son Joseph, who played a critical role here in carrying out God's plan. And we know that. And I want you to see that no matter what life may throw at you, God has a plan for your life. Maybe you've been beaten down or fallen into a pit, or someone has betrayed you. This is not the end of your journey. It's not the fall in life that tells your story. It's the way we respond to those pitfalls, those setbacks that define our character. And see, the Bible says if God is for us, who can stand against us? In verse 1, and Jacob dwelt in the land wherein his father was a stranger in the land of Canaan. You know, many times in life we experience pitfalls. We experience setbacks in which we did not cause, like Joseph. We can continue on with our lives, and then there may be storm clouds all around us of betrayal that's coming to us. Joseph did not have a clue regarding of the betrayal waiting for him by his own brother. Neither did his father Jacob, blindsided by his brothers. Jacob had put his struggles behind him concerning his own brother Esau. We talked about him last week. They had been going at it from birth. Esau had sold his birthright to Jacob for a bowl of lentils. Because Esau despised his birthright, he disrespected that birthright. He counted it worthless or distasteful. And the Lord said unto Rebekah, He said unto her that there was two nations in her womb, Israel and Edom, two manner of people, good and evil. And they shall be separated from the bowels. Sin separates us from God. That one people shall be stronger than the other people. We know Jesus is stronger than Satan. He says the elder shall serve the younger. See, Jesus will rule one day over all the earth. See, we seen last week through Obadiah the works of both nations. The hatred for one another had caused a relationship to deteriorate. And even at one time, Jacob even had to flee his home for his life. Years later, he finally had reconciled, and Jacob did not live in that fear anymore, but he moved back home to start a new fresh walk with God. Here we see Bethel. It was located in Canaan, known to God's people as the Promised Land later, because God had promised to Abraham this land. But yet he was a stranger in this land because there were other tribes living in that land in that time. In verse 2 it says, "These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brethren, and the lad was with the sons of Bilhah, and with the sons of Zilpah, his father's wife, and Joseph brought unto his father their evil report." It had seemed that trouble had moved out of Jacob's past, but it continued to grow every day in the presence of his dysfunctional family. Joseph turned out to be a victim of family pain that continued to run through that family line. The story of Jacob's marriage, favoring one wife over the other one. Jacob loved Rachel, obviously damaged the relationship with Leah. Jealousy regarding gradually consumed both wives. With the birth of children, Rachel at one time could not have children for a long period of time, while Leah was having no problems having children. Then eventually Rachel had two sons, Joseph and Benjamin, but she died. And when she gave birth to Benjamin, and Jacob had 6 sons with Leah. He also had 2 concubines. One of them was named Bilhah. She served as Rachel's handmaid, which gave him 2 sons. Then another handmaid named Zilpah, Leah's handmaid, which gave him another 2 sons, which gave him a total of 12 sons altogether. But to make matters worse, Leah's oldest son had lay with Bilhah, Rachel's handmaid, and Jacob knew it, but he kept quiet. In fact, he may not have confronted Reuben until right before he died in Egypt, when he blessed the rest of his sons except Reuben. Joseph had grew up in a very dysfunctional family, where jealousy had been for a long period of time in his family. This time jealousy did not come from the wives or the concubines, but Jacob himself. He favored Joseph over all the other sons. So this storm had begun to rain when Joseph brought home an evil report about his 4 brothers, the sons of his father's concubines. Joseph had been tending the sheep with them, and apparently he saw something that made him want to tell his father, because he thought that Jacob needed to know that. Jacob and Joseph had a special relationship. They had a bond that the others did not have. So Joseph's decision to tell of what he saw, he thought of himself as being a loyal son to his father, while his brothers saw him as a tattletale. 2 views from both sides. Verse 3. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all of his children, because he was the son of his old age, and he had made him a coat of many colors. Now Jacob did not care what his other sons had thought about him, especially showing favoritism towards Joseph. Joseph had come along at a time in his life when he was old, and Jacob's life, when his father has a greater affection for a young son, would have been hard to resist. This was one of his baby boys. This relationship made it very tense between them, especially between Joseph and his brothers. Then on top of that, Jacob made his favorite son a coat of many colors. In those times, a robe or a coat here would have covered his wrist, even all the way down to his ankles. The men who worked in the fields would have not wore such a heavy garment or a bulk garment such as this, because it would have made it difficult to move around. Not only would it have restricted his arms and his legs as they worked, but without a doubt, this coat had set him apart as Jacob's favorite son. But it also signaled that Joseph's superior position over his brothers, over his Jacob's other sons. In verse 4 it says, And when his brothers saw that his father loved him more than all of his brothers, they hated him, and they could not speak peacefully unto him. So without knowing it, Joseph continued to be set up for betrayal. His own brothers, they could not see how their father had showed favoritism towards Joseph, and nothing they could do would ever change that. Jacob was he just plainly loved Joseph more than his other children. And he done this in a way that was in front of them that they seen with their own eyes. And this began to form a hatred for Joseph. They could not even speak to him in a peaceful manner. Their jealousy continued to grow in their heart to a point they became unwilling to act normal around him. They had lost all respect for him because their father had showed love and affection for him. And they could not speak peacefully towards him at all. In verse 5, and Joseph dreamed a dream, and he told his brethren, and they hated him yet the more. Just to make matters even worse, adding really kindled to the fire, Joseph dreamed a dream, and he told his brethren about his dream. He shared the details of that dream with his brothers. See, what he shared left them with an impression that he would rule over them someday. So their hatred for Joseph only grew even more intense. You see, it set up the stage for betrayal. They hated him more for his dream, for his words. Even his father rebuked him and told him, shall I and the mother brethren indeed come to bow down ourselves to thee, to the earth? His brothers envied him while his father observed the same. That word observe is to watch or to show attention to details of the behavior. So this was something that was an ongoing. Skipping down to 19, and they said one to another, behold, this dreamer cometh. Today, animosity and jealousy can lead others to betray us. The combination of these is as a deadly poison. They can turn ordinary people into a very dangerous person, into your enemies or your adversary. So the hatred for Joseph consumed his brothers. It caused them to begin to plan in their heart, especially after his dream, because his dream was that he would reign supreme over his father, his mother, as well as his own brothers. The reality is, no one took his dream well. But here, the scene changed to the wilderness where Joseph had went out. His father had demanded him to go out to check on his brethren to see how they were doing, and Joseph's brethren had taken the sheep to graze in the open pasture. And Jacob had become worried, concerned about them, and this not only showed that Jacob still loved his other sons as well, so he sent Joseph out to check on them. They had traveled over 60 miles by the time Joseph had found them, and when they saw him from a distance, they already had envy in their heart, and it began to take over in their lives. And they called him a dreamer as he headed towards them. This shows their really true feelings towards him as he was traveling towards them. Verse 20 says, come now, therefore, let us slay him and cast him into some pit, and we will say, some evil beast has devoured him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams. This jealousy towards Joseph had turned into angry for him, really into a cold hatred, murderers. They was encouraging each other to take advantage of the situation as he arrived. They began to work together to provoke a plan to slay him. That word slay in Hebrew has a meaning of a brutal or violent execution. So their rage of anger began to plan out their plan of what they would tell their father about his death to justify his death. Listen to what they said about his dreams. See, they underscored their rage over the prospect that he would reign over them one day. So by killing him, they would remove that possibility of his dream that it would ever come true. Look, our enemy today is planted in advance to catch us in a vulnerable position, to take our dreams, our hopes, to make us no longer useful to the kingdom of God. He wants to take all of those dreams and all those hopes away from us. Verse 21, and Reuben heard it, and he delivered him out of their hands and said, let us not kill him. God had a plan and purpose for our lives. He had a plan and purpose for Joseph's life. God had a plan for Joseph's life, and he began to use his plan by using the oldest brother Reuben to put a stop to this crazy idea of killing Joseph. Now Reuben had enough respect among his brethren that caused them to listen, to take him seriously, to take notice. He saw that they was even serious about killing Joseph. And he understood their hate because they were going to cross the line. Reuben already had a guilty heart of what he had done to his father, sleeping with their handmaid. He would have to take on more responsibility for Joseph's life. And this was just too much to take in. So he urged them, saying, let us not kill him. This was an awareness to demonstrate that he understood about taking his brother's life was going too far. Verse 22, and Reuben said unto them, shed no blood, but cast him into the pit that is in the wilderness, and lay no hand upon him, that he might rid him out of their hands, to deliver him to his father again. You have to think about Reuben. He was using this moment in time probably to mend that relationship with his father, if that was even possible, because all that he had done, the involvement of his father's handmaid servant. So he may have been setting himself up to be a hero, that he could win his father's favor once again. Either way, God wanted to keep Joseph alive, and so he used Reuben to tell him to shed no blood, but to cast him into this pit. This pit is in the wilderness, that nobody to lay a hand upon him. Now, you got to think a shepherd in this time period would David dig a pit into the ground to catch water for their flock. These pits would dry up after a period of time, but it would leave a hole in the ground that would be very dangerous, and even if a shepherd was to fall into one of these pits, he could never get out on his own. And Reuben knew that Joseph would never be able to escape from the pit, no matter how hard he tried. But secretly, Reuben anticipated of returning to that pit so he could rescue him by pulling him out and delivering him to his father, safe and secured once again. Satan wants to get us into a pit that we cannot be a help to anyone, to give up hope in Christ, to lose faith. And he paints a beautiful picture with all the wonderful things in front of us. But he has camouflaged those traps along the way so that we cannot see. Because he wants us to fall into those pits. Verse 23, and it came to pass when Joseph was come unto his brethren, that they stripped Joseph out of his coat of many colors that was on him. Reuben had continued to convince them not to shed any blood, but this never stopped them from mistreating him. So they seen him coming from a distance, far away. Their eyes could just see the coat of many colors that he wore. It just brought rage in their hearts of jealousy, and really it just struck a nerve. So when he arrived, they stripped him of his coat. That word strip in Hebrew means it has a convoy of violence towards him as they ripped it off of him. Joseph had no idea that he would be treated this way by his own brothers. And really, he trusted them to receive him with some sense of kindness, maybe a joking around with him a little bit, maybe, but he did not expect that he would have to defend himself from their cruelty, their jealousy, and their hatred towards him, to betray him. He trusted them, but by stripping him of his coat from him and throwing him into a pit was unexpected for him. Verse 24, and they took him and they cast him into a pit, and the pit was empty, and there was no water in it. So now they have taken his coat, his robe from him, and they've cast him into a pit. This pit was empty. It was a dry hole. There was no water in it. So he suffered the agony of betrayal. He had no water to quench the thirst, no way to escape. His brothers did not care at this point. Joseph's brother had taken the steps of no return of betraying their own brother. What led them to that decision? Jealousy and envy had filled their hearts over the relationship between Joseph and their father. Jacob had favored him over the rest of his sons. That was shown by giving him a coat of many colors, which signified favor. He also did not like Joseph's dream because it painted a picture of one day that they would be subject to him. The dream alone threatened them, and it fed this hatred towards him. 26, and Judah said unto his brother, what profit is if we slay our brother and conceal his blood? Today, when others abandon us or they betray us, God is still working on our behalf. Like Joseph, you might find yourself all alone, forsaken, even broken, because someone else's cruelty or someone has done you wrong. Betrayal. We can look back on these hurtful and betrayal days of our lives and see the invisible hand of God at work. We can see how God has helped us, how that He's held us, how that He's protected us, and He's moved us along to keep us in His plan for our lives. We don't have to understand everything, but that God gives us wisdom to be able to recognize His hand at work in our lives. See, God has already worked through Reuben to keep Joseph alive. The other brother, named Judah, spoke up and gave them another option. Unlike Reuben, Judah looked at Joseph with nothing more than a prophet with money in his pocket. We know Mark 8:36 says, for what shall it profit a man if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul? Judah saw value of the life as some extra cash in his pocket. It was a way of letting his brother live. After throwing Joseph into a pit, they had sat down to begin to enjoy eating a meal to observe this caravan coming their way. They was close to a major trade route in which the merchants would travel to a major city. And this caravan approached them. Judah came up with an idea. Hey, let's make a profit on him. Which he had the best profitable idea of all of them. He says, what profit is it if we slay our brother and we conceal his blood? See, this idea allows them not to kill their brother, but it also challenged them not to conceal his blood. It also reminds us of a story about Cain and Abel. Jealousy of Abel drove him to commit murder. And when God confronted him about taking Abel's life, He directed Cain's attention to the harsh reality that he could never cover up the murder that he had done. Why? Because God told him, He told Abel that Abel's blood cried out from the ground. In that same way, Judah directed his brothers, may have not been promoted by fear, but that he may have feared shedding Joseph's blood that might have provoked God's punishment towards them. 27, come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hands be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh. And his brethren were content. So instead of leaving their brother, there to die in a pit, Judah convinced his brothers to sell Joseph to the Ishmaelites, who just happened to be traveling their way. Don't you find that interesting today? God had already made arrangements for this Ishmael headed down to Egypt. These travelers had brought another painful story in which told another part of a family of their great-grandfather Abraham and Ishmael with Hagar, the handmaid of Sarah, and later Abraham and Sarah would have Isaac. Sarah's hospitality towards Hagar and Ishmael drove them away. We know that he was a man always on the run, and so these traders obviously belonged to the family of Ishmael. Now once more Judah talked to his brothers and they warned them against laying hands upon Joseph. And he said, let not our hands be upon him. Why? Because he is our brother and out of our flesh, pretending here to take the higher road to show how wrong it would be if they was to murder their own flesh and blood. It would be harder to defend themselves, or even if they had to take life into their hands, or to even try to explain this to their father. Joseph had done nothing wrong to harm them, but to tell his dreams of what he dreamed and his father's love towards him. Judah really wanted to kill Joseph, but he had no problems of selling him to a stranger. So this tragedy, it began to work, and they made a profit off of Joseph on his behalf. They drug him out of the pits. They sold him to the Ishmaelites, who would later take him down into Egypt and sell him for a slave. So by taking him off into a foreign land, he would be forgotten by his brothers. His dreams would be over about reminding them that he would reign over them one day. That dream would never come to pass then. And finally, they had gotten rid of their little brother that they hated so much. But see, sometimes in life we have to have a setback so that we can move forward. Joseph's life at this point did not look hopeful at all. He had been betrayed by his own brothers that had sold him to be a slave. Everything that ever amounted to him was gone. Joseph had lost everything that was important to him: his coat, his family, his freedom, most of all, his identity. The reality is Joseph never gave up hope in what he lost. Instead, he raised his hands towards God. They thought they was doing something wrong by hurting him. But the reality was they was setting him up closer to his dreams. Why? Because God had it intended for him to go to Egypt anyway. Think about Job. Job never lost hope in God after suffering the loss of everything. He held to his faith. There were times in his life that he felt all alone, down and out. But he kept on searching for God. Down in Egypt, Joseph can now accomplish God's plan for his life and for his people. So we see how that the important reason why God protected Joseph from his brothers. Then he used all of those bad things that was happening in Joseph's life to mold him and to prepare him for the great responsibility that awaited for him in Egypt. See, God is at work in our lives. Even though we cannot see those things, He's working behind the scenes to work out His plan for our life. See, when the storms of life come, they may catch us off guard, but not God. See, God is aware of the problems, our circumstances. He's not asleep on the job. He's fully aware of everything going on around us. He's aware if we're being betrayed, let go. But we must respond to Him in faith. Then He will hold us. He will hold us up He will help us continue to press on. He will take our broken hearts. He will heal it and mend it back together again. He will begin to mold us and to make us and to shape us into the life about keeping His plan. I want you to know today, wise men sought out Jesus. That's because Jesus will never turn His back on His people. He's not going to abandon us or leave us. Yet He gave us His word to guide our footsteps. As we trust Him, He will guide and direct our life and our path to what He wants us. What lies ahead of us? There are many things that we don't understand in life. We can not see far enough ahead to plan out our lives. Jesus says in Luke 12:29-32, "And seek not ye what ye shall eat or what you shall drink, neither be you doubtful minded. For all of these things do the nations of the world seek after. And your Father knoweth that you have need of these things, but rather seek ye the kingdom of God, and all of these things shall be added unto you. Fear not, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom." I don't know about you, but I've been driving down the road with your children or your grandchildren, and they're in the back seat, and they might continue to urge you to hurry up, to go faster. They may insist you to hurry to pass someone, or to turn here, or to take a shortcut. But they're too young to read and understand the signs, maybe the speed limit of 45, or the double lines on the road, or the red light up ahead. So when you put on your brakes, they may ask you, "Why are you stopping? Let's go, let's hurry." You may have to explain to them all of these things are meant for our good, to keep us safe. We've all heard that song, "Jesus, Take the Wheel." See, when God takes the wheel, we may request something, but never insist on something, because we're just like those children. We're too young. We don't fully understand all that lies in front of us in our lives. So when God turns, or maybe He swerves to miss a pothole, He's looking out for our best interest. We like to think that we can outdrive God. We know that we like to think that we know what we're doing. But the reality is, we don't. The devil is always trying to make us to take a detour. Just a little ways here, make a turn here, get us lost, to give up hope and faith. Then God comes by and He uses those things in our life to mold us and to shape us into the image of His dear Son. We must remember those road marks of our lives and let God be God. See, God knows everything. He sees everything in our path. And then we must let His words guide our feet to the light of His words.